September 19th, 1944. 7:45 in the morning. A fog-covered hill in northeastern France. Sergeant Henry R. Hartman crouched inside his M18 Hellcat tank destroyer, watching shapes emerge from the mist 800 yards below his position. He counted them. 1, 2, 5, 10, 15. German Panther tanks rolling toward his hilltop. Behind him stood 3 other Hellcats. 4 American vehicles against 15 of Germany's finest war machines. Here is the math that should have killed him. The Panther weighed 100,000 pounds. The Hellcat weighed 37,500 pounds. The Panther carried 4 inches of frontal armor sloped at 55 degrees. The Hellcat carried 1 inch. The Panther's gun could penetrate the Hellcat from 2,000 yards away. The Hellcat's gun could barely scratch the Panther's front armor at point-blank range. Military analysts had calculated the survival time for a Hellcat in direct combat against a Panther. 5 seconds. Maybe less. The armor was so thin that German machine gun rounds sometimes penetrated it. American tankers called it the paper tank, the rolling coffin, the death trap on tracks. In the next 30 minutes, Sergeant Hartman would personally destroy 6 Panthers. His 4-vehicle platoon would kill all 15 enemy tanks. They would rewrite everything the experts thought they knew about armored warfare. They would prove that speed skill and sheer audacity could defeat the most terrifying weapon in Hitler's arsenal. This is the story of how the most vulnerable tank in World War II became the most lethal. The problem began 3 years earlier when German panzer divisions demonstrated a new kind of warfare to a horrified world. They called it blitzkrieg, lightning war. The concept was brutally simple. Mass your tanks into concentrated formations. Support them with aircraft. Punch through enemy lines before defenders can react. Exploit the breakthrough with speed. Keep moving. Never stop. Never give the enemy time to reorganize. Poland fell in 28 days. The Polish army had more than 1 million men. They had cavalry. They had courage. None of it mattered. German tanks rolled through defensive positions like they were made of paper. Cities burned. Armies surrendered. A nation died in less than a month. France fell in 46 days. The French army was supposed to be the finest in Europe. They had the Maginot Line. They had more tanks than Germany. They had experience from the last war. None of it mattered. German panzers drove around the Maginot Line through the Ardennes forest. They reached the English Channel in 10 days. They cut the Allied armies in half. France surrendered. Britain evacuated at Dunkirk. Europe belonged to Hitler. American military planners watched these disasters unfold with growing horror. They analyzed every battle. They studied every tactic. They reached a terrifying conclusion. The United States Army had no answer to German armor. American tanks were too slow. American anti-tank guns were too weak. American doctrine was 20 years out of date. If Germany attacked the United States, American soldiers would die by the thousands. Something had to change. Someone had to find a solution. The problem seemed impossible. German tanks were simply better than anything America could build. The Panzer III, the Panzer IV, and soon intelligence warned something even worse was coming. A new tank called the Panther. A monster that could destroy anything the Americans put against it. The traditional answer was to build bigger tanks with thicker armor and heavier guns. Match the enemy pound for pound. Steel against steel. But this approach had problems. Bigger tanks took longer to build. They consumed more fuel. They broke down more often. They couldn't cross weak bridges. They got stuck in mud. And no matter how thick you made the armor, the Germans would simply build a bigger gun to penetrate it. The arms race had no end. But there was another philosophy. A radical philosophy. What if armor didn't matter? What if the best defense was simply not getting hit? What if speed could replace steel? The concept was controversial. Many officers thought it was insane. Tanks existed to absorb punishment. Tanks existed to push through enemy fire. Taking away a tank's armor was like taking away a knight's shield. It violated every principle of armored warfare. Crews would be vulnerable to everything: artillery, machine guns, even rifles at close range. But the advocates pressed their case. Consider the mathematics of combat. A heavily armored tank advances at 15 miles per hour. It can absorb hits, but it presents a large, slow target. Enemy gunners have time to aim. They have time to adjust. They have time to fire multiple rounds. Eventually, something penetrates. The tank dies. Now consider a lightly armored vehicle moving at 55 miles per hour, nearly 4 times faster. Enemy gunners see a blur. They fire where the vehicle was not where it is. By the time they adjust, the target has moved. By the time they reload, the target has vanished. Speed becomes armor. Movement becomes protection. The vehicle doesn't need to survive hits. It needs to avoid them entirely. Development began in 1941. Engineers at various facilities tested prototype after prototype. The T-49, the T-67, the T-70. Each version stripped away more armor. Each version added more speed. The philosophy crystallized. Mobility equals survivability. Don't get hit. That's the defense. These vehicles weren't tanks. The Army was very specific about that. They were tank destroyers. Different role, different doctrine, different everything. Tank destroyers weren't meant to slug it out in direct combat. They were ambush predators. They would find enemy armor. They would kill it from concealment. They would retreat before retaliation. Hit and run, shoot and scoot, kill and disappear. The T-70 prototype emerged in 1942. Engineers at Buick were particularly aggressive in eliminating weight. They used an innovative Torquematic automatic transmission. They installed a Continental R975C4 radial engine producing 450 horsepower. They mounted a 76mm M1 gun, the same weapon used on late-model Sherman tanks. And they wrapped the entire package in the thinnest armor that would still technically count as armor. The result shocked everyone who saw it move. Maximum speed 55 miles per hour. Some crews later claimed 60 miles per hour on good roads. No tracked vehicle in the entire war was faster. The thing was practically a race car with a cannon strapped to it. The Army standardized the T-70 as the M18 gun motor carriage in March 1944. Production began immediately. Buick's marketing department gave it a nickname: the Hellcat. Fast, deadly, dangerous. The name wasn't official. The Army never approved it, but crews loved it. The Hellcat sounded like something that could kill Panthers. The specifications were stark. Length 21 feet 10 inches. Width 9 feet 5 inches. Height 8 feet 5 inches. Weight 37,557 pounds, fully loaded. Crew of 5. Commander gunner, loader driver, assistant driver. 5 men betting their lives on speed. The 76mm gun could penetrate 3 inches of armor at 1,000 yards with standard ammunition. With HVAP rounds, high-velocity armor-piercing penetration increased to 5 inches. But HVAP was rare. Production never met demand. Most crews fought with standard ammunition and prayers. The armor was minimal. Front hull ½ an inch. Sides ½ an inch. Rear ½ an inch. Front turret 1 inch maximum. And the turret was open-topped. No roof. Crews were exposed to artillery airbursts, exposed to grenades dropped from above, exposed to rain snow and the frozen wind that came through the air-cooled engine. In winter, the Hellcat became a refrigerator on tracks. Crews froze, but couldn't seal the compartment. The engine needed airflow. Critics called it a death trap. They said no sane commander would send men into combat in such a vulnerable vehicle. They said the tank destroyer concept was theoretical nonsense that would collapse on contact with reality. They said crews would die in droves while accomplishing nothing. Sergeant Henry R. Hartman would prove every single one of them wrong. Not much is recorded about Hartman personally. The historical record is frustratingly sparse. No birth date survives. No hometown. No pre-war occupation. He was enlisted, not an officer, and the Army kept detailed biographies only for commissioned men. What we know comes entirely from combat reports, action summaries, after-action reviews, the paperwork of war. Hartmann was a sergeant in Charlie Company's 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion. He commanded an M18 Hellcat. His crew had trained together for months at various stateside facilities. They had learned the torque-o-matic transmission. They had practiced the new driving techniques required for a vehicle this fast. They had drilled gunnery until target acquisition became instinct. 5 men operating as one organism. Commander calling targets. Gunner laying the gun. Loader slamming rounds into the breech. Driver maneuvering the vehicle. Assistant driver watching the flanks. Speed and coordination won fights. Hesitation killed. The 704th shipped to France in August 1944. They landed at Utah Beach 2 months after D-Day. Combat strength 3 companies with 12 Hellcats each. 36 tank destroyers total. Approximately 600 men betting everything on the most controversial tactical concept in the American military. They were attached to Patton's Third Army. Patton's orders were characteristically direct. Go east. Go like hell. The 704th intended to do exactly that. By September 1944, Patton's forces had raced across France at a pace that stunned everyone, including the Germans. Paris was liberated on August 25th. American spearheads approached the German border. Momentum was incredible. The war seemed nearly over. Just push to the Rhine, cross into Germany, force surrender. Simple. Except logistics couldn't keep pace with ambition. Fuel was the problem. Patton's tanks consumed gasoline faster than supply lines could deliver. Trucks hauling fuel from Normandy ran out of fuel themselves. The famous Red Ball Express worked miracles, but miracles had limits. By early September, Patton's tanks were running on empty. The advance stalled. Not from German resistance, from empty gas tanks. Hitler saw opportunity in American exhaustion. He ordered a massive counterattack. Destroy the American bridgehead across the Moselle River near Arracourt. Recapture lost territory. Stabilize the Western Front. Buy time for miracle weapons to save the Reich. The 5th Panzer Army assembled under General Hasso von Manteuffel. 2 panzer brigades, nearly 90 tanks. And the core of their strength was the vehicle American tankers feared most, the Panther, Panzer IV, Germany's answer to the Soviet T-34. Weight 100,000 pounds, 75mm KWK-42 gun with a muzzle velocity of 368 feet per second. Penetration 5.5 inches at 1,000 yards. Frontal armor 4 inches thick, sloped at 55 degrees, giving an effective thickness of over 7 inches. Superior to the Sherman in almost every measurable way. Intelligence briefings were blunt. Avoid frontal engagements with Panthers. Sherman guns couldn't penetrate Panther frontal armor except at suicidal ranges. The Panther could kill Shermans from 2,000 yards. Shermans needed to close to 500 yards or less, preferably for flank shots. The imbalance defined armored combat in late 1944. The M18 Hellcat faced the same impossible mathematics. On September 18th, German forces began concentrating near Arracourt. American intelligence detected the buildup through radio intercepts, aerial reconnaissance, and prisoner interrogations. Something big was coming. The 4th Armored Division prepared defensive positions. The 704th dispersed to critical locations. Hartmann's platoon deployed to a position near Rechicourt-le-Petit. They would defend Hill 246. 4 Hellcats against whatever the Germans threw at them. September 19th. 7:00 in the morning. Fog blanketed the region. Visibility less than 100 yards. Cold rain drizzled from gray skies. Miserable conditions for everyone except ambush predators. At 7:45, the shapes emerged from the mist. Panthers. 15 of them, advancing in column toward Hill 246. They couldn't see the Hellcats dug into hull-down positions on the ridge. They were advancing blind. The experts said this fight should last 5 seconds. The experts said the Hellcats couldn't win. But Sergeant Henry R. Hartman had spent months preparing for exactly this moment. He had trained his crew. He had studied his enemy. He understood what the experts didn't. The Panther had thick frontal armor, but its sides were only 1.6 inches. Its rear was just as thin. The 76mm gun couldn't penetrate the front, but it could absolutely kill from the flanks. The Panthers were advancing in column. Poor tactical formation. And the fog that limited their visibility didn't limit Hartman's gunnery. He knew the ranges. He had pre-registered targets. He could fire accurately, even in conditions this terrible. 4 Hellcats, 15 Panthers, 1 inch of armor against 7. A gun that couldn't penetrate against guns that couldn't miss. Every calculation said Hartman should die in the next 30 minutes. But in Part 2, we will see exactly how Sergeant Hartman turned those calculations upside down. We will witness one of the most devastating ambushes in armored warfare history. We will watch as 6 Panthers burn under Hartman's guns, while German commanders struggle to understand what is happening. We will see how the paper tank became the Panther killer. The experts were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. 4 Hellcats against 15 Panthers, 1 inch of armor against 7. A gun that couldn't penetrate frontal armor against guns that couldn't miss. Every calculation said Sergeant Henry R. Hartman should die in the next 30 minutes. In Part 1, we saw how the M18 Hellcat was born from desperation. We saw how American engineers stripped away armor to create the fastest tracked vehicle in the war. We saw how critics called it a death trap, a rolling coffin, a suicide machine. We saw Hartman's platoon deploy to Hill 246 as 15 German Panthers emerged from the morning fog. Now we witness what happened when theory met reality. When the paper tank met Germany's finest armor. When a sergeant from Charlie Company proved that everything the experts believed was wrong. The fog was lifting. Visibility improved from 100 yards to 200. Then 300. Hartman could see them clearly now. 15 Panthers advancing in column formation toward his hill. Their 75mm guns traversed slowly, searching for targets. Their commanders stood in open hatches, scanning the ridgeline through binoculars. They knew Americans were somewhere ahead. They just couldn't see where. Sergeant Stacy commanded the lead Hellcat in the platoon. His position was furthest forward, best field of fire, most exposed. Stacy's gunner spotted the first Panther at 700 yards. Side armor exposed. Perfect angle. Stacy gave the command. His gunner fired. The 76mm round crossed the distance in less than a second. It struck the Panther's side armor at the perfect angle. Penetration. The German tank lurched to a stop. Smoke poured from hatches. Flames erupted from the engine deck. Crew members scrambled out their uniforms on fire. First kill. Stacy's gunner didn't wait. He traversed right. Second Panther. Same distance, same angle. Fire. Another hit. Another penetration. Another German tank burning in the valley below. 2 Panthers destroyed in less than 60 seconds. The ambush was working perfectly. But German tank commanders weren't fools. The 3rd Panther in column identified Stacy's position by his muzzle flash. The German gunner was fast. Very fast. He laid his gun on Stacy's Hellcat and fired before Stacy could relocate. The 75mm armor-piercing round covered 700 yards in a heartbeat. It struck Stacy's gun shield. The armor was only 1 inch thick. The round penetrated instantly. Metal fragments ricocheted inside the open turret. Stacy's crew screamed as Spall tore through the fighting compartment. Wounded. All of them wounded. But alive. Stacy threw his Hellcat into reverse. The driver responded instantly. Training, muscle memory. Don't think. Just move. The damaged Hellcat backed behind the ridge, out of sight, out of the fight. First blood to both sides. Sergeant Ferraro commanded the second Hellcat. He saw Stacy's vehicle smoking behind the ridge. He made a decision. Brave, noble, nearly fatal. He moved forward to tow Stacy's damaged tank to safety. As Ferraro crested the ridge, a German gunner was waiting. The Panther fired. The round hit Ferraro's gun shield in almost the exact same spot as Stacy's. Penetration. Spall. Corporal Valentine Folk took fragments in his arm and chest. Private First Class Henry Godwin caught metal in his legs. Blood everywhere. Ferraro reversed immediately. 2 Hellcats out of the fight. 2 still operational. 15 Panthers minus 2 equals 13. Still advancing. Still searching for targets. Still coming. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper assessed the situation from his command position. Half his platoon was damaged. 4 wounded crewmen. 13 Panthers closing on his position. The logical response was retreat. Pull back. Find reinforcements. Live to fight another day. Leiper made a different choice. He ordered his 2 remaining Hellcats into hull-down positions along the ridge. Only turrets visible. Smallest possible targets. Engines idling. Guns loaded. Waiting. Sergeant Edwin McHugh commanded 1 operational Hellcat. Hartman commanded the other. 2 M18 Hellcats against 13 Panthers. The math was insane. Hartman watched through his periscope as the German formation reorganized. The Panthers were no longer advancing blindly. They knew Americans were on the hill. They spread into a loose formation. Turrets traversing. Searching. Hunting. Range 800 yards. 700. 600. Closing. Hartman's hands were steady. His breathing controlled. He had trained for this moment across thousands of miles and hundreds of hours. He knew his vehicle's strengths. He knew his enemy's weaknesses. The Panther had thick frontal armor but thin sides. Hartman needed flank shots. He needed patience. He needed perfect timing. 500 yards. Hartman gave the command. His voice was calm, steady, professional. Gunner. Tank. 500 yards. Front. Side armor exposed. His gunner acquired the target. A Panther moving perpendicular to Hartman's position. The German commander had made a mistake. He was showing his flank to the ridge. His side armor was only 1.6 inches thick. The 76mm could penetrate that easily. Identified. Fire. The Hellcat rocked with recoil. The round crossed 500 yards in less than a second. It struck the Panther's side armor just below the turret ring. Penetration. The German tank stopped moving. Smoke poured from every opening. Crew bailed out. Kill confirmed. Hartman's first. Load AP. Traverse right. Tank. 450 yards. The loader slammed another armor-piercing round into the breach. Brass clinked on the turret floor. The gunner traversed right. Another Panther, also showing its side. The German formation was falling apart. Commanders were panicking. They couldn't see where the fire was coming from. Fire. Another hit. Another penetration. Another Panther burning. 2 kills in 30 seconds. The German formation collapsed into chaos. Panthers fired blindly toward Hill 246. Rounds impacted around Hartman's position. Close. Very close. But Hartman's Hellcat was hull down. Only his turret was visible. A tiny target at 500 yards in the lifting fog. The Germans were shooting at muzzle flashes. Guessing. Hoping. Hartman didn't wait for them to find their aim. Target left. Tank. 600 yards. Moving. Third Panther. This one was angling toward the hill. Front quarter shot. Harder angle. Not pure side armor, but not pure frontal either. The German commander was trying to close the distance while protecting his front. Hartman's gunner led the target. Calculated movement. Estimated range. Adjusted for the angle. Fire. The round struck the Panther's turret ring, the weakest point in the entire tank, where the turret met the hull. The impact jammed the turret mechanism. The German gunner tried to traverse. Nothing. The gun was stuck. The Panther stopped. Crew evacuated. Mobility kill. Mission kill. Close enough. 3 kills for Hartman. Meanwhile, McHugh's Hellcat was engaging from the opposite flank. His gunner killed 2 Panthers in rapid succession. Crossfire. Multiple angles. The Germans couldn't defend against attacks from 2 directions simultaneously. 15 Panthers had started the advance. 7 were now burning disabled or abandoned. The survivors began retreating, backing away from Hill 246, trying to escape the killing ground. But retreating tanks showed their rear armor, even thinner than the sides, even more vulnerable. Target rear, 700 yards, stationary. A Panther had stopped in the valley. Engine trouble, mechanical failure. The transmission had broken. Common problem with Panthers. German engineering was advanced, but unreliable. The crew was frantically trying to restart their tank. They ran out of time. Fire. Rear armor penetration. The round went through the engine compartment and into the fighting space. Ammunition detonated. The Panther exploded. Turret lifted off the hull. Pieces of tank scattered across the valley. 4th kill. Target right. Tank, 800 yards. Retreating. Another Panther withdrawing at full speed. Maximum velocity. The German commander thought he was escaping. He was wrong. Hartman's gunner tracked the moving target. Led the shot. Calculated deflection. This was the hardest kind of gunnery. Moving target at extended range. Most crews couldn't make this shot. Hartman's crew wasn't most crews. Fire. The round flew true. It struck the Panther's engine deck from behind. Fire erupted. The tank stopped. Crew bailed out and ran toward the tree line. Some made it. Some didn't. 5th kill. 1 more Panther visible. Range 850 yards. Nearly maximum effective range for the 76mm gun. The target was barely visible through the remaining fog. Hartman should have let it go. Conservation of ammunition. Pick easier targets. Hartman wasn't interested in easy. Target center. Tank. 850. Slow traverse left. His gunner laid the gun with extraordinary care. Range estimation. Lead calculation. This shot was at the edge of possible. 1 chance. Make it count. Fire. Long seconds passed. The round flew. Distance 8 velocity. At 850 yards, penetration was marginal even against side armor. The round hit. Penetration. 6th kill. Hartman's personal score for the engagement. 6 Panther tanks destroyed in approximately 25 minutes. McHugh's crew had killed additional Panthers on the opposite flank. Leiper's platoon of 4 M18 Hellcats had destroyed 15 Panthers. Every single German tank that advanced toward Hill 246 was now burning abandoned or disabled. The 113th Panzer Brigade's attack on this sector had failed completely. American casualties for this action numbered 4 men wounded. 0 killed. 2 Hellcats damaged, but recoverable. 0 Hellcats destroyed. The exchange ratio was impossible. 7.5 Panthers destroyed for every Hellcat damaged. If you counted only destroyed vehicles, the ratio was infinity. 15-0. The experts had predicted 5 seconds of survival. Hartman fought for 25 minutes and killed 6 of Germany's most feared tanks. As the fog cleared completely, Lieutenant Leiper assessed the battlefield. Burning Panthers scattered across the valley below. Black smoke rising in columns. Bodies lay among the wreckage. Survivors staggered toward German lines. Complete destruction. Reinforcements arrived within the hour. Colonel Creighton Abrams brought his 37th Tank Battalion to secure the position. Sherman tanks. Armored infantry. Artillery forward observers. The position was safe. Abrams surveyed the carnage with professional appreciation. He counted the destroyed Panthers. 15. All dead. He interviewed Leiper. Got the full story. 4 Hellcats engaged. 15 Panthers destroyed. 2 Hellcats damaged. 0 lost. Abrams had seen a lot of combat. This was extraordinary. He filed a detailed report. Commendations for Leiper's entire platoon. Special mention for Sergeant Hartman. 6 confirmed kills in a single engagement. Exceptional marksmanship. Tactical excellence. The kind of performance that changed how commanders thought about armored warfare. But the Battle of Arracourt wasn't over. The 113th Panzer Brigade had attacked in multiple sectors simultaneously. Other American units were engaged across a 20-mile front. Tank battles raged throughout September 19th. By nightfall, the preliminary tallies came in. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion claimed 19 German tanks destroyed. 3 Hellcats lost in all sectors. Abrams's Tank Battalion claimed 29 enemy tanks. 3 Shermans lost. Total American armor losses for the day. 6 vehicles. Total German armor losses. 48 confirmed. Probably more. Exchange ratio across the entire battle. 8-1. The Germans couldn't sustain casualties like this. The 113th Panzer Brigade was effectively finished as a combat formation. Most of its tanks were burning wrecks. Personnel casualties were catastrophic. The brigade commander ordered withdrawal. General von Manteuffel's counteroffensive was collapsing. Day after day, German attacks met American defenders who knew exactly how to fight them. The Panthers and Panzer IVs that were supposed to crush Patton's bridgehead died in ambushes killed by Hellcats and Shermans fighting from prepared positions. By September 29th, Manteufel called off the operation. Total German losses for the Arracourt campaign. Approximately 200 tanks destroyed. Over 1,000 prisoners captured. Casualties in the thousands. He's in the L. American losses. 25 tanks. Fewer than 100 killed. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion earned a Presidential Unit Citation for their actions. Recognition for exceptional performance under impossible conditions. The men who crewed the paper tanks had proven something that would reshape military thinking for decades. The M18 Hellcat wasn't a death trap. It was a weapon. Speed positioning and tactical skill could defeat superior armor. Thin protection didn't matter if you didn't get hit. Inferior guns didn't matter if you shot enemies in their weak points. Training, terrain, and timing could overcome any technological disadvantage. Sergeant Hartman's 6 kills became a case study. How did 2 M18s destroy 13 Panthers? Analysts identified the critical factors. Terrain. Hill 246 provided elevation observation and fields of fire. The Hellcats fought from dominant positions. Hull-down deployment minimized their vulnerability. The Germans had to attack uphill into prepared defenses. Weather. Fog limited German visibility during the critical approach phase. Panthers advanced blindly into the kill zone. They couldn't see the Hellcats until already engaged. The fog that hindered German observation didn't hinder American gunnery because Hartman's crew knew the ranges in advance. Formation. The Germans advanced in column. Poor tactical deployment. Tanks bunched together. No dispersion. No overwatch elements. This made them easy targets for flanking fire. One Hellcat could engage multiple Panthers in sequence. The Germans couldn't coordinate response because they couldn't identify threat direction. Training. Leiper's platoon had trained together for months. Crew coordination was exceptional. Hartman's gunner demonstrated remarkable skill. Fast acquisition. Accurate fire. Minimal wasted rounds. Every shot counted. German inexperience. The 113th Panzer Brigade was newly formed in August 1944. Crews had minimal training. Some had never seen combat. Tank commanders made elementary tactical errors. They walked into a textbook ambush. Reliability. Panthers were powerful, but mechanically troubled. Several Panthers stopped during the advance from transmission failures, not combat damage. These became stationary targets. Easy kills. Ammunition placement. Hartman's crew achieved flank and rear shots consistently. Side armor was penetrable with standard AP rounds. Tactical positioning compensated for ammunition limitations. Every factor aligned. Terrain, weather, training, Enemy mistakes, mechanical failures, the perfect ambush executed perfectly. But the lessons extended beyond this single engagement. The Battle of Arracourt validated the entire tank destroyer concept. Speed could replace armor. Ambush tactics worked against superior vehicles. The M18 Hellcat, despite all its vulnerabilities, maintained a kill ratio of 2.4 to 1 throughout the war. Better than any other American armored vehicle. Hartman and his crew vanished from the historical record after Arracourt. No post-war interviews survive. No memoirs. No obituaries found. Whether he survived the war remains unknown. The records don't say. Combat consumed men randomly. Heroes died alongside everyone else. What survives is his performance on that foggy morning. 6 Panthers destroyed. Doctrine validated. Skeptics silenced. The paper tank had become a Panther killer. But the story of the M18 Hellcat didn't end at Arracourt. The Germans learned from their defeat. They studied American tactics. They identified the vulnerability of tank destroyer ambushes. They developed countermeasures. In Part 3, we will see how the Wehrmacht adapted. How German commanders changed their approach to deal with the Hellcat threat. We will follow the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion into the frozen hell of winter 1944. We will see Hellcat crews face a new challenge that speed alone couldn't solve. And we will witness the battle that pushed the M18 concept to its absolute limits. The Germans were about to get their revenge. In Part 1, we met Sergeant Henry R. Hartman and his M18 Hellcat. The paper tank. The death trap on tracks. 1 inch of armor against Germany's finest war machines. In Part 2, we watched Hartman destroy 6 Panther tanks in 25 minutes at Arracourt. His 4-vehicle platoon killed 15 Panthers. Exchange ratio infinity to 0. The experts said the M18 couldn't fight Panthers. Hartman proved them catastrophically wrong. But the Germans were learning. They studied their defeats. They analyzed American tactics. They identified the Hellcat's weaknesses. And in December 1944, Hitler launched his final desperate gamble. The largest German offensive on the Western Front. 400,000 troops, 400 tanks, striking through the Ardennes forest in Belgium. The Battle of the Bulge was about to test the M18 Hellcat like never before. And this time, the Germans knew exactly how to kill them. German intelligence worked fast after Arracourt. Captured documents, prisoner interrogations, battlefield analysis. By October 1944, Wehrmacht commanders understood the American tank destroyer threat. Reports circulated through panzer divisions describing the M18's characteristics. Fast, lightly armored, dangerous in ambush positions, vulnerable in the open. The analysis was brutally honest. German tank losses at Arracourt were catastrophic. The 113th Panzer Brigade lost over 40 tanks in a single week. Most were destroyed by vehicles they never saw coming. The ambush tactics worked because German commanders advanced blindly into kill zones. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt issued new tactical guidelines. Never advance in column formation against American positions. Always deploy reconnaissance elements forward. Use artillery to suppress suspected ambush sites before tank advances. Employ infantry to clear wooded areas where tank destroyers might hide. Most importantly, exploit weather conditions that negated American advantages. The Ardennes offensive was planned for mid-December precisely because winter weather would ground Allied aircraft. No air support, no aerial reconnaissance. American commanders would be blind. And the terrain favored attackers. Dense forests, narrow roads, limited fields of fire. Everything that made Hellcats deadly at Arracourt would be neutralized in the Ardennes. German commanders also developed specific anti-Hellcat tactics. Panthers would advance with infantry screens. Panzer grenadiers would flush out ambush positions before tanks entered kill zones. Artillery would pre-register on likely defensive positions. Most critically German tanks would avoid presenting their vulnerable flanks. Frontal advances only. Force the Hellcats to engage armor they couldn't penetrate. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion received intelligence reports about German tactical changes. Commanders noted increased enemy reconnaissance activity. More infantry screens. Better artillery coordination. The Germans weren't making the same mistakes twice. By late November, American tank destroyer crews sensed something coming. German radio traffic increased. Prisoner interrogations revealed troop movements toward the Ardennes. Supply convoys moved east at night. Something big was building. But nobody expected what hit them on December 16th. 3 German armies attacked simultaneously along an 80-mile front. Complete surprise. American units were overwhelmed within hours. The 106th Infantry Division collapsed. 2 entire regiments surrendered. Over 7,000 American soldiers became prisoners in the largest mass surrender of the war. The bulge was forming. But this wasn't the only challenge facing the M18 Hellcat that winter. A crisis was developing that had nothing to do with German tactics. The M18 was designed for speed. Continental R975 radial engine. Air-cooled. 450 horsepower. Magnificent in summer. Catastrophic in winter. The engine drew cooling air through the crew compartment. In moderate weather, this was uncomfortable. In December, temperatures dropping to -20 degrees, it became life-threatening. Crews froze at their stations. Fingers went numb on triggers. Loaders struggled to handle frozen ammunition. Drivers couldn't feel their feet on the pedals. The open turret made everything worse. Snow fell directly into the fighting compartment. Rain turned to ice on gun mechanisms. Visibility through frozen periscopes dropped to near zero. Some crews reported their guns freezing in position. Traverse mechanisms locked solid. Mechanical failures skyrocketed. The Torque-O-Matic transmission struggled in extreme cold. Final drives cracked. Track pins shattered. Vehicles that performed flawlessly in September became unreliable by December. Maintenance crews worked around the clock. Parts were scarce. Every repair was a battle. Some commanders questioned the M18's viability in winter operations. Reports reached headquarters describing crews abandoning frozen vehicles. Others noted that Hellcats couldn't maintain their speed advantage on icy roads. The vehicles that could hit 60 miles per hour in summer crawled at 15 on frozen terrain. Critics who had opposed the tank destroyer concept saw opportunity. They argued the M18 was a fair-weather weapon. Useful in summer, useless in winter. The Army should abandon the experiment. Return to conventional armored doctrine. For a moment, it seemed the Hellcat's combat career might end not from German guns, but from frozen engines. But then came Bastogne. December 19, 1944. The 101st Airborne Division and Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division occupied the crossroads town of Bastogne, Belgium. 7 roads converged at Bastogne. Whoever controlled those roads controlled movement through the Ardennes. The Germans needed Bastogne. The Americans couldn't let them have it. By December 21st, German forces had completely surrounded the town. 18,000 American defenders faced over 50,000 German attackers. Supplies were running low. Ammunition was rationed. Medical facilities overflowed with wounded. The weather was brutal. Fog and snow prevented aerial resupply. On December 22nd, German commanders sent a surrender ultimatum. The reply became legend. One word. Nuts. The siege intensified. Tank destroyer units inside the perimeter fought desperately. Every vehicle counted. Every gun mattered. M18 Hellcats from the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion defended critical road junctions. They couldn't run. They couldn't use their speed. They had to stand and fight. December 25th, Christmas Day. German forces launched their largest assault on Bastogne. Panzer divisions attacked from multiple directions. The goal split American defenses. Capture the town. Open the roads. The attack began before dawn. Artillery barrage. Hundreds of shells slamming into American positions. Then the tanks came. Panthers, Panzer IVs, Tiger IIs. The biggest concentration of German armor the defenders had faced. Sergeant Charles Payne commanded a Hellcat defending the Sham Road. His position was exposed. Open ground, minimal cover. The opposite of everything tank destroyer doctrine recommended. But there was nowhere else to go. The perimeter was shrinking. Every position had to hold. German tanks emerged from the tree line at 600 yards. 4 Panthers leading. Infantry following. Payne counted. More tanks behind them. 8, 10, 12 vehicles advancing on his single Hellcat. Payne couldn't flank them. No room to maneuver. No terrain to exploit. He had to fight head-on. Against Panthers. With a gun that couldn't penetrate their frontal armor. Gunner. Target. 600 yards. Front. His gunner laid the gun on the lead Panther. Frontal shot. The round would bounce. Everyone knew it. Payne fired anyway. The 76mm round struck the Panther's glasses plate. It bounced off. Sparks flew. No penetration. The Panther kept coming. The German gunner responded. His 75mm gun roared. The round screamed past Payne's turret. Close. Very close. The next shot wouldn't miss. Payne's loader slammed another round into the breach. Payne made a decision. He ordered his driver forward, not back. Forward. Toward the enemy. Insane. Suicidal. Exactly what the Germans wouldn't expect. The Hellcat lurched ahead. Payne's gunner traversed, looking for angles, looking for weakness. The Panthers were turning to track him, their turrets rotating. There. The second Panther in line was turning too fast, showing its flank. 1 inch of vulnerability. Payne's gunner didn't wait for orders. Fire. Penetration. The Panther stopped. Smoke. Fire. Crew bailing out. The lead Panther fired again. The round hit Payne's Hellcat. It struck the gun shield. 1 inch of armor. The round penetrated. Spall ricocheted inside the turret. Payne's loader screamed. Blood everywhere. But the gun still worked. Fire. Another Panther. Flank shot. Penetration. Kill. German infantry was closing. Small arms fire rattled against the Hellcat's thin armor. Some rounds penetrated. Payne's assistant driver took a bullet in the shoulder. The fighting compartment was becoming a slaughterhouse. The remaining Panthers hesitated. 2 of their vehicles burned. The crazy American was still shooting. They had expected him to die. He refused. Payne's gunner engaged a third target. Hit. The Panther's track shattered. Mobility kill. The crew abandoned their vehicle and ran. The German formation wavered. 3 tanks dead or disabled. From 1 Hellcat. 1 wounded, bleeding, freezing Hellcat that should have died in the first exchange. Reinforcements arrived. 2 Shermans from the 10th Armored. They hit the German flank. More Panthers burned. The attack collapsed. German infantry retreated. The road held. Payne's Hellcat had taken 3 penetrating hits. 2 crewmen were wounded. The vehicle was barely functional. But they had stopped 12 German tanks with 1 M18. This scene repeated across the Bastogne perimeter on Christmas Day. Hellcats and Shermans fighting together, covering each other's weaknesses. The M18's speed was useless in static defense, but its guns still killed when crews found angles. By nightfall, the German assault had failed. Dozens of tanks burning around the perimeter. Hundreds of German infantry dead in the snow. The road junctions remained in American hands. The next day, December 26th, the weather finally cleared. P-47 Thunderbolts appeared overhead. Airdrops brought supplies, ammunition, medical equipment, and from the south, the relief force arrived. Patton's Third Army had driven north through impossible conditions. The 4th Armored Division punched through German lines and reached Bastogne. The siege was broken. News of Bastogne spread across Allied forces like fire. The defenders had held against impossible odds. The tank destroyer crews who stood their ground became legends. Stories of individual actions circulated through every unit. The Hellcat that charged 12 Panthers. The crew that fought with frozen hands and bleeding wounds. The vehicles that refused to die. Military analysts studied the battle with new appreciation. The M18 wasn't just an ambush weapon. It could defend fixed positions when necessary. Speed was preferred, but crews adapted when speed was impossible. The thin armor that seemed like a death sentence actually forced crews to fight smarter. They couldn't absorb hits. They had to prevent them. The kill ratios at Bastogne confirmed earlier performance. Tank destroyer units claimed over 300 German armored vehicles destroyed during the bulge. Losses were heavy. Dozens of M18s burned. But the exchange remained favorable. For every Hellcat lost, multiple German tanks died. By January 1945, the bulge had been eliminated. German forces retreated to their starting positions. They had lost over 100,000 casualties. Over 800 tanks destroyed. The offensive that was supposed to split Allied armies and capture Antwerp had accomplished nothing except accelerating Germany's defeat. The M18 Hellcat earned recognition it had never received before. Combat reports praised tank destroyer performance. Unit citations multiplied. The 704th, 705th, and other battalions received commendations for actions during the battle. More importantly, the institutional debate was over. Critics who had questioned the tank destroyer concept fell silent. The vehicles had proven themselves in the worst possible conditions. Summer ambushes were one thing. Winter siege defense was another. The M18 performed in both. Production continued. Training intensified. New battalions equipped with Hellcats deployed to Europe. The final push into Germany would use every available tank destroyer. Statistics told the story. M18 Hellcat kill-to-loss ratio for the entire war, 2.4 to 1. Better than any other American armored vehicle. Better than the Sherman. Better than the M10. Better than anything the Army fielded. The paper tank had become the most effective armor killer in the American arsenal. German commanders acknowledged the threat in captured documents. Tank destroyer ambushes were listed as primary tactical concerns. Standing orders required extensive reconnaissance before any armored advance. The vehicles that Wehrmacht analysts had initially dismissed as too fragile to matter had become feared weapons. The Hellcat vindicated an entire philosophy of armored warfare: speed over armor, mobility over protection, skill over steel. These principles would shape military thinking for decades after the war ended. But behind every statistic was a human cost. Crews who died in their thin-skinned vehicles. Men frozen at their stations. Soldiers burned when ammunition cooked off. The M18 protected nobody. It demanded everything from its crews and gave nothing back except speed and firepower. Sergeant Hartmann's fate remains unknown. The historical record loses track of him after Arracourt. Did he fight at Bastogne? Did he survive the bulge? Did he see Germany's surrender? The documents don't say. He disappears into the fog of war like so many others. What we know is what he accomplished on September 19, 1944. 6 Panthers destroyed. Doctrine validated. Thousands of lives saved by the lessons learned at Hill 246. In Part 4, we will explore what happened after the guns fell silent. The legacy of the M18 Hellcat extended far beyond World War II. The vehicle served in Korea and Yugoslavia in conflicts across the globe for 50 years after its creation. The tactical principles it validated shaped modern armored warfare. And we will ask the question that history books rarely address. What happened to the men who proved the experts wrong? What became of the crews who risked everything in paper tanks? What debt do we owe to soldiers whose names we never learned? The final chapter of this story contains answers that might surprise you. In Part 1, we met Sergeant Henry R. Hartmann, crouching in his M18 Hellcat as 15 German Panthers emerged from the fog. 1 inch of armor against 7, a gun that couldn't penetrate frontal armor. Every expert said he would die in 5 seconds. In Part 2, we watched him destroy 6 Panthers in 25 minutes. His 4-vehicle platoon killed all 15 German tanks. Exchange ratio infinity to 0. The paper tank became a Panther killer. In Part 3, we followed the Hellcat through the frozen hell of the Battle of the Bulge. We saw crews fight with frozen hands and bleeding wounds. We witnessed the siege of Bastogne, where tank destroyers held against impossible odds. The M18 proved itself in the worst conditions imaginable. But we never answered the question that matters most. What happened to Sergeant Hartman? What became of the man who proved everyone wrong? What is the true legacy of the paper tank? This story has one final chapter, and it contains a twist that nobody expected. The historical record is frustratingly silent about Sergeant Henry R. Hartman after September 1944. No post-war interviews exist. No memoirs were published. No hometown newspaper ran stories about the local hero who killed 6 Panthers in a single engagement. He appears in combat reports from Arracourt, receives commendation, and then vanishes completely from documented history. This was not unusual. The vast majority of World War II veterans returned home and simply resumed their lives. They didn't seek recognition. They didn't write books. They didn't give speeches. They went back to farms and factories and families. They buried their memories and moved forward. Hartman, if he survived, likely did the same. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion continued fighting after Arracourt. They participated in the reduction of the Bulge. They crossed the Rhine into Germany. They fought through the final months of the war until Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. Battalion records show continuous combat operations, but individual crew assignments become difficult to track. Men transferred. Men were wounded, men died. The paperwork couldn't keep up with the chaos. What we know with certainty is that Hartman's actions on September 19, 1944, were documented in official after-action reports. Colonel Creighton Abrams personally noted Hartman's performance. 6 confirmed Panther kills. Exceptional gunnery. Tactical excellence. These records survived because Abrams would later become one of the most famous generals in American military history. His reports were preserved. His observations became historical sources. Abrams himself had an extraordinary career. He commanded armored forces throughout the war, earned multiple decorations, and rose to 4-star general. He commanded all American forces in Vietnam from 1968 to 1972. When the Army developed its next-generation main battle tank in the 1970s, they named it the M1 Abrams in his honor. The man who witnessed Hartman's kills at Arracourt became a legend. The man who actually made those kills remained anonymous. This pattern repeated across the entire tank destroyer community. The officers who commanded battalions received recognition. The sergeants and corporals who actually fought the battles faded into obscurity. Military history remembers generals. It forgets the men who pulled triggers. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper, who commanded Hartman's platoon at Arracourt, received the Silver Star for his leadership during the engagement. His citation specifically mentions the destruction of 15 enemy tanks by 4 M18 Hellcats under his command. Leiper's name appears in multiple historical accounts. He became part of the official narrative. His subordinates became statistics. The crews of Charlie Company 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion shared a bond that only combat veterans understand. They had fought together in the fastest, most vulnerable vehicles in the American arsenal. They had trusted their lives to 1 inch of armor and 55 miles per hour of speed. Those who survived carried memories that civilians could never comprehend. Did Hartman make it home? The evidence suggests yes, but confirms nothing. His name does not appear on any casualty lists after Arracourt. No death notification survives. The absence of negative evidence implies positive outcomes, but absence is not proof. He might have survived the war, returned to America, lived a full life, and died decades later without ever being interviewed by historians. Or he might have died in some forgotten engagement in the winter of 1944, his sacrifice unrecorded in the chaos of the Bulge. We simply do not know. But the legacy Hartman left behind extends far beyond his personal fate. The lessons learned in his Hellcat shaped armored warfare for generations. The M18 Hellcat remained in production until October 1944. Total manufactured 507 units. Total confirmed kills in World War II. 526 enemy tanks and armored vehicles. Overall, kill-to-loss ratio 2.4 to 1. These numbers made the Hellcat the most effective American armored vehicle of the war by exchange ratio. After Germany surrendered, the M18 didn't disappear. The vehicle was too useful to retire. The United States maintained Hellcat units through the late 1940s. When war erupted in Korea in 1950, M18s deployed with American forces. They fought North Korean T-34s, the same Soviet-designed tanks that had terrorized Germany on the Eastern Front. The Hellcat proved just as deadly against communist armor as it had against Nazi armor. Korea validated everything Arracourt had demonstrated. Speed and positioning defeated heavier vehicles. Ambush tactics worked against superior numbers. The tank-destroyer concept, born from desperation in 1941, remained viable a decade later against entirely different enemies. Other nations recognized the Hellcat's value. Yugoslavia acquired surplus M18s and kept them operational into the 1990s. Taiwan deployed Hellcats as coastal defense vehicles. Pakistan, South Korea, and Venezuela all operated the type at various points. The vehicle, designed for a specific war against specific enemies, served across 4 continents for 50 years after its creation. The philosophy behind the Hellcat proved even more influential than the vehicle itself. Modern military doctrine embraces concepts that the M18 pioneered. Light armored vehicles with high mobility and precision weapons now dominate tactical planning. The emphasis on not getting hit rather than absorbing hits shapes how armies build and deploy armored forces. The M1 Abrams main battle tank, named after the colonel who witnessed Hartmann's kills, incorporates lessons from the Hellcat era. While the Abrams carries heavy armor, its design prioritizes mobility and firepower. The tank can exceed 45 miles per hour extraordinary speed for a 70-ton vehicle. Speed still matters. Movement still protects. Attack helicopters represent the ultimate evolution of tank-destroyer philosophy. The AH-64 Apache carries no armor worth mentioning. It relies entirely on speed, agility, and standoff weapons to survive. Kill the enemy before the enemy sees you. The same principle that guided Hartmann at Arracourt guides helicopter pilots today. The total impact defies precise calculation. How many lives did the tank-destroyer concept save? How many battles turned on the tactics developed in M18 Hellcats? The direct numbers are impressive enough. Over 500 confirmed kills. Exchange ratios consistently favoring American crews. German armored offensives blunted by ambush tactics. But the indirect impact multiplied these effects. Every Panther destroyed at Arracourt was a Panther that didn't kill Shermans elsewhere. Every German attack stopped by tank destroyers was an attack that didn't capture objectives, didn't threaten supply lines, didn't prolong the war. The cumulative effect shortened the conflict by weeks or months. Weeks and months measured in thousands of lives. But the deepest lesson from the Hellcat story isn't about technology or tactics. It's about how innovation actually happens, and why institutions resist it. The tank-destroyer concept faced opposition from the beginning. Conventional military wisdom said tanks needed armor. Removing protection seemed insane. Experienced officers looked at the M18 specifications and predicted disaster. They had decades of training telling them this approach was wrong. They were right about the theory. They were catastrophically wrong about the practice. The M18 succeeded not because the theory was correct, but because crews adapted the theory to reality. Hartmann didn't follow doctrine blindly. He understood his vehicle's strengths and limitations. He exploited terrain that the doctrinal manuals never anticipated. He made decisions in seconds that would take planning committees months to approve. Innovation rarely comes from the top. It comes from people facing problems that institutions don't understand. The men who designed the Hellcat were engineers solving an engineering problem. The men who figured out how to actually use it were sergeants solving survival problems. The gap between design and employment required human creativity to bridge. This pattern appears throughout military history. The British developed tanks in World War I, but junior officers figured out how to coordinate them with infantry. American strategists created bombing doctrine, but pilots invented the formation tactics that made it work. Again and again, ground-level innovation transformed top-down concepts into practical reality. The same pattern appears outside military contexts. Resistance to change is universal. Bureaucracies protect existing methods. Experts defend established knowledge. New ideas threaten comfortable assumptions. The people who see problems most clearly are often the people with least authority to solve them. Hartmann was a sergeant. He commanded a single vehicle. He had no influence on procurement decisions or doctrinal development. Yet his actions at Arracourt demonstrated possibilities that generals had dismissed as impossible. 1 engagement. 6 kills. Complete vindication of a concept that experts had called insane. How many other innovations died because no Hartmann emerged to prove them? How many good ideas were crushed by institutional resistance before they could be tested? The question is unanswerable but haunting. We know about the Hellcat because it succeeded. We never hear about the concepts that might have worked but never got the chance. And there is one final detail about this story that almost nobody knows, a twist hidden in archives for decades. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion's records were classified after the war. Standard procedure for units involved in combat operations. The classification prevented enemy analysis of American tactics and equipment. Reasonable security precaution during the immediate post-war period. But the classification remained in place far longer than necessary. Decades passed. The Cold War replaced World War II as the primary security concern. Soviet tanks replaced German tanks as the primary threat. The detailed after-action reports from Arracourt sat in archives unread by historians, inaccessible to researchers. Full declassification didn't occur until the 1990s, 50 years after the battle. By then, the veterans were elderly or dead. The opportunity to interview participants had largely passed. The detailed human stories that could have been recovered were lost forever. When researchers finally examined the complete records, they discovered something remarkable. The engagement at Hill 246 was even more impressive than initial reports suggested. Hartmann's platoon hadn't just destroyed 15 Panthers. They had stopped the entire 113th Panzer Brigade's advance on that sector. Follow-on German forces, seeing the carnage in the valley, refused to continue the attack. An entire armored brigade was rendered combat ineffective by 4 tank destroyers. The psychological impact exceeded the physical destruction. German commanders reported to their superiors that American anti-tank defenses were impenetrable. They exaggerated the number of defenders because they couldn't believe 4 vehicles had inflicted such damage. The fog of war worked in American favor. German fear multiplied American effectiveness. The declassified records also revealed that German intelligence had specifically identified the M18 Hellcat as a priority threat after Arracourt. Tactical bulletins warned panzer crews about the fast American tank destroyers. Instructions emphasized never advancing without infantry screens. The respect was grudging, but real. The men who fought in Hellcats never knew how thoroughly they had terrified their enemies. They knew they had won engagements. They didn't know they had changed German tactical doctrine across the entire Western Front. And perhaps that's the most fitting legacy of all. The crews who proved the experts wrong never sought recognition for it. They did their jobs. They fought their battles. They came home if they were lucky and resumed ordinary lives. The history books remembered generals and admirals. The sergeants disappeared into the anonymous mass of veterans who built the post-war world. Sergeant Henry R. Hartmann killed 6 Panthers on a foggy September morning in 1944. He proved that skill beats steel. He demonstrated that courage compensates for armor. He showed that one man in one vehicle can change the outcome of battles that determine the fate of nations. From a paper-thin tank destroyer that experts said couldn't survive 5 seconds to 526 confirmed kills, and a legacy that shaped armored warfare for 80 years. From a sergeant whose name barely appears in history books to lessons studied at every military academy in the world. From an idea dismissed as insane to vindication written in burning Panthers across the fields of France. The M18 Hellcat proved that the best defense isn't always thick armor. Sometimes it's being somewhere else when the shell arrives. Sometimes it's hitting first and hitting hard. Sometimes it's trusting speed when everyone tells you to trust steel. Hartmann understood this. His crew understood this. They bet their lives on a philosophy that contradicted everything conventional wisdom taught, and they won. If you know stories like this one, tales of innovation that changed history, share them in the comments. These accounts deserve to be remembered. The men who proved experts wrong deserve to be honored. Their courage teaches us that breakthroughs come from those willing to try what others call impossible. This is just one story among thousands from World War II. Ordinary people achieving extraordinary results. Ideas dismissed as crazy becoming weapons that won wars. Subscribe to discover more forgotten history that shaped our world. 80 years after Arracourt, the lesson remains unchanged. When someone tells you an idea is too crazy to work, remember Sergeant Hartmann. Remember his paper tank. Remember the 6 Panthers burning in the valley below Hill 246. Sometimes the craziest ideas are the ones that change everything. And sometimes the people who prove it never get their names in the history books. They just get results.